So when you say now, I'll go.
3, 2, 1.
Good morning, folks, and welcome to Galway Politics Live. Sorry we're a few minutes late going out this morning, but I think it's the weather has affected us ever so slightly. So first of all, I'd like to introduce my co-host, Niall Brolcháin.
How are you doing, Mike? And
good.
Today we're discussing, has Galway lost its civic pride?
Exactly, and I'll be very, very interested to see what our three panellists have to say about it. So just introduce them all. First of all, welcome back to Galway City Council for John Connolly.
Thank you, Mike.
John, of course, prevented me winning a seat back in 2004. Fair play to him. And he's back now in City West, so fair play to John. Delighted to have you back. Delighted, John is with Fianna Fáil, of course, and delighted to have the first Social Democrat to be elected to Galway City Council, Owen Hanley.
Well done, Owen.
Well done, Owen. Very good. Now, the gentleman beside me, I don't know how to describe him. I would
Not
say
as a
myself,
gentleman, Mike.
I would describe Brendan Speedie Smith as a gentleman and a great candidate
He
for
is a
directly
gentleman.
elected
Right,
mayor
I'll take
when we
that back.
finally have one in Galway. But Niall, tell us a bit about him.
About Brendan Speedy
Yes.
Smith. Well, I don't want to take up the whole programme talking about Brendan Speedy Smith, but I can, I mean, he's a great Green campaigner. I mean, he's a campaigner for all things civic and all things pride in Galway, to be honest, just like the other two gentlemen here.
Excellent.
So, what we're going to be discussing is, has Galway lost its civic pride? And
Excellent.
hopefully the answer will be no,
Yep.
but we'll see. I think in
Well,
some
I think
areas,
it has. I think it
there's
has
a bit of
in a
work to
bit.
be done.
Yeah. So we're going to start off. So we might start off with Owen Hanley, the newest councillor here, and civic pride is a very, very wide topic. So you can nearly.
Well,
pick
maybe
anything.
we could just get Owen to introduce himself first,
Perfect.
because not everybody out there in Cyberland knows him yet.
Yes.
They will after this, of course.
Oh, I think I'm more
course.
famous in Cyberland, but
I think you are, Owen,
yes.
actually. I think you are.
My name's Owen Hanley. I'm the first Social Democrats councillor for Galway City Council. I suppose I'm the youngest ever councillor on Galway City Council, and so in that way, I suppose there's perhaps a bit of a generational shift. And I think even with this question alone, we're seeing this idea of harkening back. It's this idea that we've lost something that we had at one stage. But the question is never, did we actually have that in the first place? And I suppose, in my opinion, we haven't so much lost civic pride in that we have seen a transition from Galway being a large town to a small city. And I think in that transformation, you see a change and a different set of expectations when it comes to what we expect out of civic society, what we expect out of our community, and how we as people living in a city interact with each other. So I think because of that, we have a different set of goals, different set of problems, but a different set of activism and movement and volunteering within the city.
Excellent, John. Well, but can I just ask you one question, if it's not too rude a question to ask? What age are you on?
I'm 24 now. I was
Excellent.
23 when I was elected, but
So
I'm
I think
24
it's
now.
really good. We've got you. You're 24, and we've got one of Galway's youngest ever mayors in Mike Cupboard. So that's really very,
Yes,
very
yeah,
progressive
yeah.
for the city. I'm delighted to see that happening. I won't mention the ages of all the other councillors, Niall, obviously. So next up, maybe John Connolly might introduce himself.
Thanks, Mike. You've introduced me quite well yourself there some time ago. Councillor John Connolly. I'm a Fianna Fáil councillor for Galway City West. I was previously a member of the council when I served in the same term as Niall from 2004 to 2009. And at that stage, actually, I was the youngest councillor, and actually I was elected at 24 as well. Owen, I hope you have more.
What age were you when you got
I
elected?
hope you-
competition.
Well-
I was 21 actually.
Good man, Niall.
Give
Well
or
done,
take,
well done.
give or
Puts him
take.
in
I
a
just
place,
hope
well
Owen
done.
has more continuity in his service maybe than I had, but I am enjoying being back in the
Now you're
council.
back.
And it's an interesting question, as Owen said. Have we lost our civic pride? I suppose it's a difficult thing to measure, and it would mean different things to different people. Some people might see, I suppose, the city developing and progressing and increased level of development as recognition of civic pride, or others might not. And I think that, when I look back on my own childhood growing up in Galway, and I try and assess where Galway was then as to where it was now, it's quite easy, I suppose, to be nostalgic and think there was more of something then. Similarly, when I listen to my parents talk of the Galway they grew up, and even my grandparents, the Galway they grew up, it's easy, again, through nostalgia, to think things were better then. But I'm not sure if a careful assessment of those times in comparison to now would give the same answer. So it is interesting that we'd look at it. It's important, but I would caution, I suppose, against being overly nostalgic.
Yeah.
It's a good point, John. And Brendan, I'm sure you have a few words to say. Go, Brendan.
Great, that's fine.
Work away.
I would definitely agree with John. There was I've been in Galway since 1975. I was an outsider, and I came to a city that was never in before in my life. It was actually never west of the Shannon, and I don't think there was ever nearer that was the golden age of civic pride. having said that, Ireland as a people have a tremendous sense of pride. You look at for most of our time in Ireland, the human species, we've been a rural people. We have a sense of community and solidarity. Some of it is due to economic, where we have to come together to do the harvest, where it couldn't be done individually, it had to be done collectively. Also because of conflict, 800 years of occupation meant that as a people we had actually in so many cases stand together. It's the cities that actually are slightly exceptional. So when I came to Galway, we were amazed as a young people coming to what was then a developing city, a growing city. We suddenly found as young people, as students, we actually dominated the city that we had just arrived in as students, because at that time there was a population maybe about 50,000, even less, but about 12,000 of them were students. A huge number were young workers coming to work in the new companies going, starting up, and also in the medical area, in the hospitals. So out of that youthfulness did come a sense of civic pride. The arts festival started then, Druid started then, lots of student activities in the area of politics started then. It became the entertainment's capital so much of the West and gradually over the whole country. And out of that sense of youthfulness came a sense of pride. And we really were the first student city. Excellent. At the same time, we were developing economically. We had a huge upsurge of multinationals coming to the city. It started off in the whole area of IT, Northern Telecom, digital, and out of that, youthful workers coming. The Salt Hill disco started and all of that, and people had suddenly a sense, my God, this is the youngest city in the country. It's the first digital city in the country. It's a student city, and out of those elements came a sense of pride itself.
Now, Brendan, I'd like to address, particularly in relation to you, the issue of vandalism.
Yeah.
Because I know I've seen pictures on Facebook
Yes.
about a greenhouse that you're involved with being vandalised, and I'd also sort of like to sort of talk about the Mutton Island lighthouse recently, which suffered appalling vandalism. Now, not everybody goes out to Mutton Island lighthouse, and that's certainly something I'd like councillors to address during their term here. You know, could we actually have access to the place, because it's a great resource, but at the same time, you know, it's sitting there, and it's just recently been very badly vandalised after huge amounts of money and effort and work have gone into it. And there's many other sites around Galway which have also been vandalised. You know, is there anything we can do about that, or is that just a fact of life?
Absolutely. The first thing of all is we should highlight them. We should talk about them. And we were at a crossroads ourselves when we decided we were coming up to our Harvest Festival in Ballinfoyle. And we found just a few days beforehand huge vandalism going on within the actual garden itself. And also, I have to be honest about it, there was problems with antisocial drinking and drug dealing in the area. And this was something, do we not talk about it? Would it impact on the harvest? If we do, would it impact on the area? And we decided to be honest and say, we have problems in Ballinfoyle, just like there are problems in Knocknacarra and Merview. And not talking about it creates like a cancer. People feel alienated. People feel that if it happens once, it's going to happen again and again. And that's exactly what the case is. So we decided to go public on it, say this is happening in our area just like it's happening elsewhere, and we want to do something about it. And it was a rallying call to the local community. This to us was definitely a crossroads, a milestone itself. Now, I would in some ways look on what has happened in Galway from the 70s. I talked about the good things that were happening. There was also the bad things. There was urban sprawl. We developed a city that was based on housing estate after housing estate, based on roads, based on car traffic, where people felt alienated. They couldn't get in safety to their own workplace, to their own place of worship, to the shops, to the schools, and all of those things. And people basically looked in on themselves. Neighbours didn't know neighbours. So the green areas of the city, the community areas, and it took us 31 years to get a community centre, sports centre, opened up in our area.
In where's
31 years. That's the Ballinfoyle Castlegar
Yeah.
neighbourhood centre, which is sports.
31 years.
31 years.
Even
We
after it
started
was
that
built,
campaign.
Brendan, wasn't there a problem?
Oh,
when
there
it
was
opened?
years before it actually opened itself, you know.
And is it working well now?
Oh, it is. I mean, it is literally almost 24/7. It's a fantastic achievement. Thanks to the council working with us on this, I have to give them due credit. So there is a lot of issues. And if we need to be open about the things that are happening in our areas, otherwise things will never change for the better. People will say, you talk about everything about the vandalism, except the drug taking, except the antisocial drinking. And we want to work with the guards, we want to work with the local authorities, the council, and be proactive on these, because then people will say, yes, this is our area, we're proud of it, we don't want to see illegal drugs being sold in our area, antisocial drinking going on in our area, vandalism going on to the area. So we have to stand up, and as a community, let's get together and make it happen.
Excellent.
And that to me is a sense of pride in
good.
action.
That's very good. Yeah.
Okay.
So just to go on, Neil, on this, one of the reasons Neil and I chose this topic was I discovered when canvassing in the last election, unfortunately, just canvassing.
And I might come on.
In the last election, I noticed that there was an awful lot of boarded up houses all around the constituency. And we discussed a figure last week, Neil. I don't know, what was the figure? Do you remember roughly that we were given as official council?
Well, people
numbers?
have different figures.
They
I
have
think
different
16
figures, but
was
there's a
the
lot.
figure, if
But
I remember
one thing that
correctly.
really, really annoyed me was I was in Cllr, which is in Galway City Central, and I came across one house, and literally across the road from them was a dump. And that's the only way I can refer to it, is there's a garden where people do bin liners and rubbish. And I was told by the occupants of the house, a very nice couple, that basically the council would do nothing about it. And I was told that at some days during the week a guy comes and sweeps the road and looks in at it, and they know all about it, but they've done nothing, you know. So when we talk about civic pride, to me civic pride is what Galway looks like to the people that live in it, as well as the people who come in as tourists. So maybe Owen, or maybe John, would you like to take up that one? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, between the contribution of Brendan and yourself, Mike, there you've raised a lot of issues. Certainly illegal dumping is an issue. And like, one has to be concerned. And I just go back to something Brendan said there when he spoke about coming to Galway first in the 70s, and how he found that there was most of the people who he, I suppose, interacted with and came to know had civic pride. And I believe that most of our citizens have civic pride.
Yeah.
I mean, the vast majority have civic pride.
Absolutely.
Now, unfortunately, there are a minority of citizens who don't. And I don't think they're exclusive to Galway.
Yeah.
I think you'll find that in most urban areas, and Brendan has mentioned there a rural-urban divide. I think even throughout the country you'll find the vast majority of people take pride in their community, pride in their city, their county, their region, pride in the state. But unfortunately we do have a minority of people who don't.
Unfortunately.
And I don't think that has changed in recent times. I think that's unfortunately been the way for some time.
Yeah.
Illegal dumping is a big issue. And actually, I seen recently the council were lauding themselves for having brought, I think it was two, now I may be wrong, two people they have found breached dumping regulations, and they brought them to court, and they had suitably had them fined. We need to tackle this head on. We need, as communities, to say, as Brendan says, whether it's vandalism, whether there's legal dumping, we don't stand for it. Good. And the way it happens, I think, is what Brendan has done in Ballinfoyle. He has brought the community together. They have their garden. They won't tolerate the fact, and it will not stop them, that there are people who are willing to vandalise their equipment and their garden. Yeah. And, you know, most communities have that spirit. One of the things I would say, though, is that I know in Sawhill Garda Station, since 2016, it has the second lowest number of new recruits of Gardaí in the country. Trim has got 2, Sawhill has got 3.
And why is that, John?
Well, I think it's just because it is seen as being peripheral to what Galway needs, and it's not the case. No. We shouldn't tolerate antisocial behaviour. No. We shouldn't tolerate vandalism. I think there's a degree of this is just what you might call nuisance behaviour. Yeah. But it's been allowed to perpetrate, so it has, and it's not being tackled. And I think we need more Gardaí on the beat. It's one way of tackling it.
I'd agree with you.
You know, and I think we need to do what Brendan says. We need to support the communities who are doing what he did.
And do you think, John, even though we will go on and have a bigger and more fulsome debate on the whole legal side of it, but do you think kind of a revolving door policy to repeat offenders causes a lot of this?
I have no evidence, Mike, to say that it does, to be honest. I mean, anecdotally, you would tend to see that there might be people who are convicted, they serve a term, they're out again, they're convicted again. And look, you would really have to go into each case individually to know that.
Yeah, I remember the current mayor raised it last year, and I thought it was a very, very good point.
Sorry?
You know, I remember the current mayor, Mike Corbett, raised it last year, and I thought it was a very, very valid point. There is an awful lot. So maybe the judges in Galway need to be that bit tougher on crime.
Perhaps. Again, I mean, it's something that you'd need to look at each case individually in that case, from my perspective, before I could generalise there. Certainly we need a greater Garda presence, and we need to support the communities like Brendan described, and the ones that he's participating in. They are replicated throughout the city. Yeah. I think in each community in the city you will find people who take great pride in their area.
Yeah.
So and we need to continue to support them.
So just one last question before I let Neil in, because he's got some more stuff there. On the whole litter thing, I mean, I think it's a disgrace in Galway that after 6 o'clock at night there's no cleaning down on streets.
You're stealing my questions, Mike.
Oh, sorry, Neil.
No,
I'm sorry.
no,
Well,
I
listen,
don't mind
They
if
do
you
say,
do.
Neil, the great
I don't
minds
mind
think
if you
alike.
do.
The
I
only
don't
thing I
mind
would
if you
say
do.
on that, Mike, is if you go through Ayr Square at 5 o'clock in the morning, you will find litter crews.
Oh, yeah. I know.
5
that.
o'clock. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, and
And I can testify to that. I've been there at 5
Absolutely.
in the morning.
I suppose
and-
the pity
and my
is, though,
goodness,
John,
it's amazing. what
having
they do.
wandered through town, sometimes at night time by 6, 7 o'clock, it's littered with chip papers and cans and stuff. And you'd wonder, is there any kind of,
well,
way that could be done as well?
I've seen in England they now have established committees in the local authorities that are waste reduction committees.
Brilliant.
I recall actually my first term as a member of the council, I accompanied Connolly when she was mayor to Milwaukee and Chicago on the annual trip.
Lovely.
And I stood in the middle of the main street of Milwaukee, and the then city manager, John Tierney, asked me, "Do you see any public bins?" None. "Do you see any litter?" None.
And why is that?
Well, I just feel people had developed, or they had learnt over
It's
there.
a culture.
It's a culture,
Well,
Neil.
it
I
is
am
a
responsible
culture.
for my litter.
That's good.
I bring it home.
Yeah.
I
Dispose of it.
appropriately dispose of it.
Yeah.
We need to get more of that kind of,
That's
and
very
fairness to
good.
Neil, he would have
Yeah,
spoken
however,
about, you know.
I don't agree with the contention that no bins means no litter. It's
I'm just giving that example,
totality
Neil.
of a culture.
Yeah.
It's a totality of a
perhaps
culture
is,
they have
but-
in
but-
Chicago.
Well, that was the case, and it was pointed out
To go back on the point, John, that's a lot better than seeing overflowing bins, which you see everywhere from the Spanish Arch to Ayr Square, all over the city.
At certain
Yeah.
times you do.
At certain
No
times,
doubt
yeah,
you do.
yeah.
At certain
Yeah,
times.
and whose fault is that?
Well, I would say the fault of that lies in the fact that we are still not treated equally as a local authority in terms of the support and resources we get from central government.
Yeah, I would agree.
We're not.
Yeah,
I mean, we're still seen as being. And Neil, you may recall this. I recall when I think it was John Tierney retired. Excuse me. Sorry, retired and
Let's
moved
not
on.
get into that one.
different
Mike.
expressions there,
but
Brendan.
when he
When he
there
moved
was
on.
there was an issue of attracting a new city manager to Galway,
Right.
and it was seen that jobs in other cities, because of their stature, because of their status as a local authority, were better jobs than the job in Galway.
Really?
Yes, and I think I don't
Which
think
is
that's
an argument for merging, but that's for another day's
well,
debate.
Well, that's another.
yeah,
that's
but I
another
don't think
debate,
that
Neil, yes.
situation has changed. I don't think that
Of course it
situation has
hasn't.
changed.
Galway has a small population.
Yeah, and it's not all that smaller than Limerick now.
Yeah.
So it's not. And we don't really have the same resources. We're not
But
getting
Limerick
the
is
same.
merged.
Do
piece of
you
the cake.
think, because this program is very much solutions based, that Owen and yourself as councillors could raise this at City Hall and see is there any way something could be done at
Yeah.
night time?
Well, I think it would be unfair to say, Mike, that it hasn't been raised previously.
Right.
I would think
Oh,
that's
it has been
unfair.
raised.
You know,
Good,
I
good, good.
absolutely.
Excellent. 'Cause I haven't
And I
heard
will
much about
continue
it.
to raise it. No doubt Owen will as well.
Right. Brilliant.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
and I think Brendan was on the beat when he said that we need to be proactive about
Yes.
things like this. I mean, in terms of vandalism, of course, it represents a small minority, and I think it's so important to call it out because if you leave it as it is, it comes almost like a silent majority,
Right.
and it's very important. But it's also important that not just about being tough on crime, because that can mean a lot of things.
Of course.
But in terms
Yeah,
of
yeah.
having a local community guard that the Balmafoyle residents
Absolutely.
would be able to link into, because
Yeah.
most of the time locals know who the perpetrator is, and
Yeah.
they're able to probably prevent a lot of things rather than looking at
Head it off.
looking at heavy solutions.
Guarded
after the
visibility
fact.
is huge.
Yeah, and in terms of dealing with our nighttime, I think it's more than just a waste issue, which of course there's a waste issue there. It's a term of what our nighttime culture is, and it's so oriented around getting drunk, and that's pretty much it. And I think it's really important that we diversify what it means to spend a night out in Galway, because otherwise we kind of just abandon it, and you don't go uptown at past 8 o'clock on a weekend unless you're looking to get drunk.
Really.
And I think, I think nightmares is a really good idea. It's been something that has been brought in,
And what's that?
where you have a mayor, a sort of a specialized role within the council that is supposed to looking
A
at.
nightmare. That's a good one.
I had visions of my cupboard going around
Yeah.
with a cart and sweet.
Well, we'll give Mike the night off and maybe give it to someone else. But
Deputy Mayor, Donal Lyons.
this
We get
idea
Donal to do
of
it.
this idea of somebody who's just looking after,
Yeah.
kind of cultivating a culture at night time that is
a very
also
good idea.
representative
Yeah.
of the diversity that we have during the day here in Galway.
If you could progress that at City Hall, we'd be delighted.
Yeah, I'd just like to say something about this. We have to be careful that when we're talking about Galway, that we're not just talking about the city centre and having the mayor appear in the city centre. Most of the population live in the suburbs, and what we need to do is develop urban villages where each area has its own entity of facilities and so on. So we shouldn't look on Galway just as the centre itself. And secondly is, there has been, and let's be honest about it, there has been a growing disconnect between the authorities and local communities. The example you raised about the waste, I mean, I've reported waste time and time again, and it hasn't been collected. I collected waste and then told that I shouldn't have moved that waste because they needed to photograph it in situ. And I say, well, if I don't collect it on a Sunday in a park, it's going to be blown all over the place. I give the names of the individuals. Sometimes you get them out of the bags. I have never yet got a positive response from City Council saying, well done you as a community for collecting the rubbish. So these are the little things. I think it's great to have new faces and youthful faces in the council. It's much more diverse than ever been, and there is a great opportunity for you as councillors to make a difference. I think Galway is at a crossroads like every other city, because the population today is going to be a lot bigger in 10, 20 years. We have to get Galway right in terms of decentralisation, in terms of urban villages, not urban sprawl. Otherwise, people will become strangers in their own city. And this is a faster response. And we get too much of a facade of lip service being paid. You mentioned about the guards. We have a community guard. He's brilliant, Marcus Flynn. But he doesn't work 24/7. He doesn't walk around the beat the way he should, because he doesn't have the resources. He doesn't live in the city, in our community. But he is a great guard locally. But any time there's there's a kind of prison duty or something like that to happen, he has to go. The community guards have to mean that. They have to be a separate division in their own right.
I just want to come in there briefly. We have a message from Minister Cllr Cannon, who's watching us, and he's saying, in answer to the question, has Galway lost its civic pride? No is the answer. Galway people have immense civic pride. So he's agreeing with you.
Is he talking about
John.
County Galway, or?
I think he's talking about Galway in general.
Yeah, and I mean, I would agree with Brendan there, and and Minister Cannon. And the question is, a Galway city or county? I mean, the region shouldn't be that. There shouldn't be that level of division within this region. I mean, it's a relatively small area, relatively small population. People of the county, and I work in the county, I work in a town actually very close to where Minister Cannon is from. They have the same type of civic pride that people in the city have. And they face the same challenges, and let's not doubt it. Just to go back to the point Brendan made there, I might as well pay tribute to our own community guard on the west side of the city.
Doing the politician
well,
thing
again,
here, John.
no, not necessarily, but I mean, he is servicing a population, and the term community guard really should be called into question, of nearly 15,000 people, and possibly over that.
Is that one guard for 15,000
one community guard?
How many community guards are there in Galway, John?
I think there might be only 4.
But that's a farce, isn't it? That's a farce.
No, you're right, Brendan. Of course, they can't.
4 community guards.
Yeah, correct.
I mean, how are you supposed to have guard visibility with 4 community guards?
You don't. Yeah, I think it's representative of how we do local in the local government.
So maybe could we put that to Minister Cannon, that he goes back to his Minister for Justice and ask them, can we have some more community guards for Galway, Neil?
Well,
I think, sorry, Neil, I just want to make the point in general that we need more guards in general. As I made the point earlier, Salthill has recruited 3 additional Gardaí from Templemore in the last 5 years, I think. It's the second lowest in the country. We need more guards in general. Yeah. And then, should we get to that point, we can then assign more of them to be community guards.
But I think, John, like 4 community guards the whole of Galway. And I mean, the idea of a community guard, to me, Brendan, would have been a guy on a bike. A guy who, knew the kids, knew the people. I think, as was it Owen pointed out, that maybe knew some of the culprits, and a quick word in the ear often stops enough of that mess. You need visibility.
Yeah. Can I say, I lived for a while in New York City. When I lived there in the late 70s, there was huge problems. It was crime infested. There were areas of Central Park that you never went to. There was great poverty, and there was a tremendous respect among all the first groups towards the Irish cop. And I was amazed with that, because I found some of the Irish over there, the older Irish, a little bit on the racist side, and I felt that, but the older people there from Puerto Rico, from Dominican Republic, the older residents, they said, oh my God, those Irish cops were brilliant. And when I looked into it, the reason is that in those days, when the Irish cops were very much a big force within the New York police force, they were the Bobby on the beat. Yeah. They would stay in the area. They would go in for a cup of tea to the workers in, say, a big apartment block, and they knew the troublemakers. They knew local people. So it was actually not that they were Irish in many ways, but that they were on the beat. Yeah. And we need to bring a presence back where the guard, as you said, he knows the people, and therefore he knows the potential troublemakers. And oftentimes it means the people aren't born troublemakers, you know. And they need how would I say to you, they need need to be pulled into side and be part of it.
Owen, I think, wanted to make a point on
I
this
just
as
think,
well.
example, we do need those guards on the beat because
Absolutely.
we're talking about presence, and you
Yeah.
look at the east side of the city, you have that big Renmore building
Yeah.
that they just recently constructed, and it's not at all reflective
Not
of
at all.
their presence within the community that is so needed. And it's this disconnect of, as was pointed out, the proportion of a local guard to the population. It's very similar to the proportion of a local politician to the population.
Absolutely.
It's this idea that we can remove
And it's
layers
preventative,
of
Owen, isn't it? It's
locality.
preventative having a community guard. I think.
It is,
Yeah.
absolutely. And the
Yeah.
more local that we can get, local politics.
Yeah,
and
one thing
local
I always
governance
thought
gets
was very
better.
stupid was that, when you join the Gardaí, they never want you in your own actual city, which I think is a bit stupid because who knows the people better than somebody raised in the area.
Yeah. In fact, I'd just like to say that's one of the reasons our previous community guard was Joe Salmon, and he lived in the area and he walked the area and everybody knew him and he'd come in for a cup of tea.
Yeah.
But then they came up with a new policy: a community guard shouldn't live in an area. And
Well, there are
this is
reasons for
crazy.
that.
What are
You
the
know, there
reasons, Niall?
genuine
What are the
reasons?
reasons?
Because, look, I mean, I don't think we need to get into that debate
Well,
today.
why not?
But I
Give
mean,
us one or two.
if
Give
you
us
like,
one or
I mean,
two,
the
yeah.
reasons for this is that it did lead to a certain level of corruption, and that is part of the problem. That when you get people too cozy with the local community, things don't necessarily work out.
I suppose
way
the
people
corollary of that,
expect.
though, is if
I
they
mean,
knew, as I was
there's
saying,
many
the
reasons
troublemakers,
for it,
yeah.
but there were genuine political reasons
Okay.
why
Yeah.
this was decided.
Yeah, look, I'm
and
not
they weren't decided by me.
I'm not sure of the relevancy of that debate. I mean, I think the Gardaí know their role.
Okay.
They know their job quite well.
Yeah.
It's interesting, as I understand it, Gardaí, as they're leaving Templemore, are kind of given a choice now whether they'd like to go to Dublin or elsewhere in the city. And many young Gardaí seem to be choosing Dublin.
Right.
And I think in recent times, actually, I'm not sure if this is in preparation for Brexit. There seems to be an increasing number of new Gardaí leaving Templemore heading for the border area. So there's, but I think the Gardaí know their role. In fact, our community guard is from Galway. I'm pretty certain he's
Is
definitely from Galway. Yeah.
Good.
So he's
Good.
Rona McNulty.
That's excellent.
I don't think he lives in our area of the city, but I'm not
He's
really
from
sure of the
Galway.
relevance of that debate.
Okay,
He knows
the
the
guards
role.
know the people.
All we need is more people like him, more Gardaí
Yeah,
like
yeah.
him.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, we need people who integrate with the community. I
This
think
is
that's,
the
that's
integration
what
is
everybody
key,
is saying here. It's
I
not.
can
It's not whether
definitely
they
see
come
us having
from
a
the
great
area,
debate on
whether
law and
they were
order
born in the area.
one of these days.
But it is an important debate. I'd like to move things on a little bit because
Niall.
I think we have two councillors here and a very civic-minded individual. I'd like to look at the role of Galway City Council in terms of civic pride, the local authority particularly, and what can actually be done by councillors in particular. To move things along. And I just point out, I walked during the Arts Festival the other day. I happened to meet another former councillor who shall remain nameless. We walked across the Salmon Weir Bridge from one of the key points in the Arts Festival, the Fisheries Field exactly, and the big tent. And we walked across the Salmon Weir Bridge. And she pointed out, look, there's a whole load of rocks.
Narrow it down.
you'll
now,
get
isn't it?
there.
Let's narrow it down. We'll figure
Narrowing it down quite a lot, actually, unfortunately. But
You wouldn't tell us the party
like
right
the
now,
bridge
no?
was falling apart. The bridge was falling apart. A lot of the rocks at the first end of it have fallen down. The paintwork is scratched. The stonework, the pavements are cracked. There's sort of foliage growing up.
Well, that's a lack of
on
civic
the bridge
pride.
itself. It looks shoddy. It looks unmaintained, and that's not down to vandalism. It's not down to anything the people have done. It's down to the fact that of lack of maintenance by the local authority. I would have to add.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Neil, the nub of your issue is resource based. There's no doubt about it. Now, on a more general point in regard to the area you've mentioned, you will be aware that the local authority are currently planning for an alternative pedestrian bridge in that area. My sense of it is that rather than looking at that as an alternative pedestrian bridge, it should be looked at as an alternative vehicular bridge, because I'm not sure if the Salmon Weir will continue to be or is of suitable structure for the traffic it has at the moment. And I really don't, I say that with no expertise in engineering, I have to say, but it would appear to me that at certain points it's not looking in great shape. And as well as that, I regularly use the 405 bus service, and that two buses can't navigate the current Salmon Weir. Now that's gone off the point, I apologise, but I just wanted to make it.
No, the
it's a good
general
point.
point.
It's a good
The
point.
general point is about the general shoddiness
Yes.
of pavements, of things,
And look,
maintenance
and
within
that-
the city by the council.
And unfortunately, that is resource driven. So it is. And we only have a very small number of areas where we can increase revenue. So we have. One of them would be to get an increased proportion of the slice of the government cake. That has seemed to be quite static over a number of years. And again, that goes back to the point I made earlier about our local authority probably not having the same status as other ones. Another option is to increase rates. And I think that there would be a reluctance, and I would share it, that we would be overburdening the business community of the city. And the other option is to increase local property tax. And again, I think there would be a great reluctance.
So there'd be a great reluctance
Yeah,
to increase
absolutely,
property
Mike.
tax.
Absolutely, Mike. There would be a great reluctance. But a lot of this, unfortunately, is resource driven. And what we need to do as councillors, working with the officials, is to try and say, okay, what are our priorities? Where needs to be addressed at the moment to ensure the city is looking and operating as well as it can?
Now, I know many businesses, and I've talked to business people who said they'd be very happy to give more money and to, in fact, give direct money if they knew it was going to be spent on things like making the Salmon Weir Bridge nice. If it was going to be spent, for example, on flower pots or doing up the roundabouts, or if it was going to be spent directly on things that were good and increased civic pride within the city. Many business people will tell you that. Many business people. And obviously in the good times it's easier to do that than in the bad times. But people don't believe the council are going to do this. And generally the experience has been negative in that regard.
So that's the option, Neil. I'm sure there's a lot of businesses out there that would do that.
That would accept slightly more money on taxes. If they
Well, no. They might even sponsor it, I would say. I wouldn't
Directly.
like to see taxes raised in any way, property tax or anything like that. If anything, I'd like to see it go down the way. Or abolish the damn thing altogether. But that's another story.
No, but let's get the councillors' view on
I
this.
suppose taxpayers don't get to decide directly like that what their taxes are paid on. And I suppose I would be reluctant to rely on the charity or a sponsorship role of taxes. I suppose there is an issue there with what value for money we get for taxes.
Even if it was
But I
in
think-
kind, though, what if, say, a gardening company came along and said, look, we'll do something?
I think that has happened in the past.
I think
Mike.
it has,
I think
John.
it has
Yeah,
happened in
yeah,
the past.
yeah.
You know, and I'm delighted to hear Neil's perspective, and I wouldn't in any way underestimate the civic pride of our business community. I think it's very significant.
Yeah.
So it is. But you know, we do have to also be conscious that they are trying to maintain employment to a certain degree.
Yeah.
They're trying to increase the footfall to their own business, and there's a lot of demands on business. So there's. But I do think, there is this. I suppose there is a sense among citizens that the council don't look after things well, and within the means that we have, the budget that we have, we need to try and improve that. We need to try and improve that.
Sure,
And again,
Brendan wants to get in there.
Yes. I think that one of the biggest problems with the council is the growing disconnect, and obviously that's due to austerity with a small number of staff. And to me, the council is turning into a glorified contract agency where things are being contracted out, and therefore they don't have control of what people do in terms of using pesticides and parks and so on. But if you look at the big problems that Galway has, there's housing. There is transport, there is green spaces. We are becoming a country now of absentee landlords again, and this destroyed Ireland for so long, where people can't afford their own accommodation because of the cuckoo funds and the vulture funds and so on. We have to bring ownership back to people. Transport, to me, the private car is finished. It's going to be cease to exist in maybe 20 or 30 years' time. We have to plan for this. The problem with cars at the moment, they cut people off from their places of work and worship.
But let's focus on
These
the
are
issue in question now, Brendan, not just about cars.
No, but it's all part of civic pride. If you have a car in a congested city, people are disconnected. If you have accommodation that people don't own or feel that is owned by somebody living in, or say working from Wall Street or Beijing, people don't lose a sense of pride. If you have parks that are being vandalized, you lose a sense of pride. I saw that happening in Central Park, and Central Park was a no-go zone back in the late 70s, and now it's a centre. So for the last 7 years, I've been fighting with trying to get the council to set up a volunteer park rangers. A few months ago, great, we finally have full-time staff in Galway Parks. We needed that, and it's the first, hopefully, of many new staff to come. But they have to reach out to the community. We're prepared to work with the council in a volunteer capacity to support the full-time staff. They are areas where they can be used as outdoor classrooms, the green gym, all of those. So there has to be a reality check with the council. More funds are needed, but also a growing interaction with the ordinary people of Galway.
Sorry, John wants.
Yeah, no, just on one point made by Brendan there, and it may be because of his initiative, but the council have recently asked for communities to come forward and engage with the council in what they call a Healthy Greens initiative. Now, it possibly is as a result of the work that Brendan has done, that they've done that. But I see that as something that will be increasingly successful. I'm not sure that we can replicate that in housing. I'm not sure we can replicate that type of community participation, voluntary participation with the local authority in terms of the maintenance and development of increased housing stock. It's easier to do that in some ways. I mean, I think there's a part somewhere. I'm really hopeful it's going to be hugely successful. I know 3 or 4 of the participant groups who've applied have discussed it with me. I'm not sure if we can replicate that in other areas.
I'll say something after.
Yeah, no bother. I suppose, participation is really vital, and I think there's a gap left after the abolition of local community group forums and town councils. But in terms of how can we apply that to housing, I think Cooperative Housing Ireland uses a model that could be interesting to look at on a wider scale, where the people who are housed in Cooperative Housing Ireland have a lifetime lease and they become members of the management board. So they are involved on an active level on how that housing development and estates are working and rolled out.
Yeah, and that's occurring. I mean, there are a number of voluntary housing agencies in Galway who have accommodation and the residents manage it together. You mentioned Tullagord, Mike, and behind Tullagord is Connolly.
That's right.
And that was developed by the Galway Housing Cooperative. And they're very forward thinking. In fact, I understand that recently they've changed the boilers in the houses from oil fired to the air to water.
Brilliant.
I mean that, and you can get a cost of that. So we do need more of that, but that's not to say it's not that isn't occurring.
And can that be supported by the council? Because I find a disconnect always between councillors and officials, for example, and there seems to be a lack of coherence in terms of how the council engages with that sort of thing and the community. The councillors do engage with the community, but the officials don't always, and they're the ones who do the work. Yeah,
and there is that degree of you'd nearly say tension between councillors and officials because of that. And we were reminded, both Owen and I attended last Monday a seminar between senior management of the council and councillors, and we were reminded by the manager of his desire to ensure that his staff are protected, and none of us want to violate that, so we don't. But also we do want to make sure that the highest potential standards, the possible standards, are met in the upkeep, maintenance and development of the city.
Good.
Yeah, I think on that, it's just we at that particular workshop that we were both at, we were very much reminded of our roles in a very narrow view, I think, of what we are capable of doing. And I think directly elected mayor as a model is one way of looking at how we can change that, of how there could be a more greater interaction.
But surely it's not up to officials to remind you of your roles. I mean, surely it's up to you guys to do.
But I think what the point Owen is making it very well, is that at times you do sense that there may be an imbalance into where the decision-making power lies within the council. And I have certainly found, since I mean it's very early days, we've only had 2 meetings. I've certainly found that the management of the council contribute equally as the members at the council meetings. And I don't know if that balance is proportionate to the democratic will of the people.
I don't think so. No.
Could I just say 2 things there? There was one thing John mentioned about what could be done. I look at Berlin, John. It's a fantastic example of what's happening over there. Local government have put together a law having a cap on rents. Fact 1. Fact 2 is they're buying a huge amount of housing stock back, so they're putting it back into public ownership. I think the Council of Galway should look at Berlin as one example. Secondly is, in terms of who decides what for Galway, I was part of, like many others, Neil, you were part of it as well at the time, from 2000 and 2002, under the restructuring of local government. All the different stakeholders of the city were called together. The business sector, the education sector, the community sector, with the city council and the state agencies. And we came up over 2000-2002, a 10-year strategy for Galway. Out of that, there was such aspirations as a pedestrian-friendly, cyclist-friendly, disability-friendly city, a city of green, ecological corridors. And it was a sense that no longer was Galway controlled by a local authority of officials and politicians. We were all in this together, and it created a tremendous sense of pride. At the same time, people were campaigning to stop an incinerator coming in for the region. We didn't want to be the regional capital for waste.
And in fairness to the councillors from all parties, really, they did
buy into
that,
it, and we became the first city in Ireland to have a tree bin, a recycling-based system.
We invented it.
We invented it in Galway because the local authority worked with the community. There were 22,000. We had, and so I think there's great opportunities, but we have.
Well, they're not as high as they used to be now.
They're not.
But I'd say the rest of the country has caught up with us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
That's
I think we've gone down a bit,
Yeah.
and the rest of the country's
Yeah.
got up a bit.
Well, to me, waste shouldn't exist. It's a resource. It's something that's only part of modern culture. I grew up where everything was recycled, everything was organically grown. We didn't use words like recycling and organic. We're only 2 generations away from that, you know. But I think this sense of what Galway is, who controls it, all the stakeholders have to come back together again. This is an alignment that previously existed, but unfortunately was kind of pushed to the sidelines in the mid.
Well, what vehicle is there in place to do that? Would the the local LDC? I can't remember the
LCDC.
LCDC. That's the word.
that
Not
is-
ACDC.
That is the
LCDC.
vehicle.
ACDC is next week.
Is that the vehicle
Sorry, Adam.
for getting this done?
I suppose that could be one avenue. I think also participatory budgeting, where the community groups come together and kind of decide the general allocation of budgeting based on need. But I think fundamentally, and Brendan said, look at Berlin. We're talking about how we were able to be innovative with tree recycling and how we had the cash for cans program, and now it's going to be scrapped. Even though it
has been scrapped.
Yeah,
It has been scrapped.
It's been scrapped.
Yeah.
And we should
Yeah,
be
and like
which is
you
a
would
shame.
have, but you would have to ask. Sorry, you would have to ask the reason why it was scrapped. Scrapped. And my concern is it may have been scrapped because of a lack of public participation.
No, John, that's opposite. They were saying that it was being abused, right? They said people were coming from outside the city. It was becoming too popular.
It's becoming too popular.
To
The
me, that was a
funding wasn't
fallacy.
there.
Being on, the money wasn't there. It basically was becoming too popular.
Too successful.
And out of it being successful, they decided to nip it in the bud. They were saying people were coming from outside of the city with their waste. Hold on,
Which is
people aren't going
probably
to travel.
true.
But people aren't going to travel 30 or 40 miles to get €6. You could only have a maximum of 3 bags.
Well, they may
and
very
were
well have been
€2
people
each.
who lived in the county but who worked in the city, or had reason to come in.
Very small.
But anyway,
But
I
I
know
would-
what you're
if-
saying.
I
It's
mean,
a poor excuse.
Yeah, but I would
Pure
foresee.
excuse.
I would foresee it being reintroduced again.
Yeah,
I mean,
it should be,
and I think everyone around the table would have
And
favoured
bottles
it.
as
My-
well
I mean,
too.
I certainly got the wrong end of the stick in terms of why it may well have been taken out.
And John, just one thing about that. Being honest about it, the cash for cans was a template for the rest of the country to follow. It's all over Europe, all over Northern Europe, as well as the bottles. So we actually were the leader, and now we disleaded ourselves, so to speak.
Well, I foresee it being reintroduced. I could certainly see it being. I could certainly see it getting unanimous support around the council chamber to reintroduce the scheme. I just
There you
might-
go. There you go.
yeah,
There's,
well, I mean,
there's a job for you guys.
Well, straightforward enough.
But I think it kind of gets back to what services we think local government and government in general should be providing. And we're talking about all these different types of services that we need to be expanding. But we're talking about really a different type of state than the one we currently have, that kind of takes on more of an active role within our society, and one that we can more engage with on a community level, but is one that perhaps we could be more proud in.
Civic pride.
Yes.
So there is an agreement generally from people that the people of Galway in general, with a few exceptions, do have a very strong civic pride. Certainly that's the answer we were kind of hoping for, Mike. But
it's probably a bit early to give the answer fully yet, but can I just bring up 2 other prescient points that I think are important?
Sure.
We talked about how businesses could help out keeping Galway better, and I wonder, since the Minister Kieran Cannon is watching, morning Kieran to you, would he maybe have a chat with his colleagues about bringing in some tax breaks for businesses to actually help out the city and all around the country? I think it'd be very, very good if there were tax incentives for them to do, say, like gardening companies to supply flowers, cleaning companies to clean, painting companies to do a bit of painting. And the other point I'd like to make is it's a huge thing on social media at the moment about housing, which we discussed last week, and there was great interest in housing. But a point that's made all the time, and so I think you made it earlier, Neil, was that too much work has been factored out. And why isn't it being done by council operatives? Surely that'd be easier to organise. John, maybe you're more long term.
Well, I mean, the only thing I would say on that, Mike, is there is a limited number of council operatives, and we
There are
possibly.
some, aren't they?
Oh, there are absolutely, yeah, and I mean, they do the job very well.
Yeah.
So they do. We need to increase probably the personnel within City Hall.
I would think so.
Increase maintenance staff, increase housing maintenance staff. I mean, I don't want the discussion to become overtly political, but on the point Brendan made about Berlin, we do live in a rent pressure zone, and under national legislation, there is a maximum cap on rents within the city. Now, it does appear to me anecdotally, Mike, that it's failing. So it does. And I mean,
we had a discussion on that last week.
I don't want to
and that
become
was the consensus
overtly
on that.
political,
Yeah.
but the current government, certainly housing is not high enough on their agenda.
Okay.
So it's not. And you know, in
Owen Murphy is watching this
well,
morning
I'm
as
not
well.
sure, but I
he
mean,
might look in on this one.
certainly there was a need for the government to participate more in the development of housing, and I think that is, I think everyone agree. I think certainly my party, you know, are shouting that from the rooftops.
Yeah. Well, housing is certainly an issue. I'd like to get onto the whole issue of parks, because we have Brendan Smith here. And I mean, we have recent research which has shown that, in fact, you know, parks lead to better quality of life, and a whole sort of greening of a city leads to a good outlook. This is the thing you've been shouting for years. And yet we have 3 parks in this city which are very poor quality. We're only beginning to get people to actually maintain them. You know, you can't actually walk through the Terryland Forest Park. It's one of our 3 key parks. You know, the Kappa Park is brimming. There's a great community group in Merlin Park. You know, but we're not up to the standard of cities like Dublin. We're not even up to the standards of cities like Limerick and Cork in Ireland. You know, and we don't really have an excuse in relation to the parks.
No.
Would you agree?
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, there's no doubt if you withdrew the staff from St. Stephen's Green and the Phoenix Park in Dublin for 1 week, they would implode with antisocial activity, with rubbish and so on. The fact that there is staff there gives people a sense of safety and the high maintenance and all of those things that go along with it. So after a campaign, and Owen, you were out campaigning with us outside protesting, and the council, fair play to the previous council, they agreed to set up full-time people on the ground. So that's true. And what you say, though, is so critical, Niall. We need it for our mental and physical health. It's been proven so much by the modern research, the importance of green spaces to our lives. And we twin with Chicago. Chicago is known as the rooftop garden capital of the world, because even City Hall in Chicago has a community garden at the top, growing vegetables and trees.
They provide their own honey, actually.
They
have
do,
bees,
absolutely.
They have beehives on top of City Hall. It's amazing.
Humanity has been on this planet 200,000 years, and the disconnect with the rest of nature, and we're part of nature, really only happened in the last 50 years. We are becoming exceptionally urbanized. So for our mental and physical health, we need to bring nature back into our lives. So we're leading a campaign, and you're part of it, Niall, is for Galway to become Ireland's first natural park city. And it's great to hear that Kieran Cannon is listening in and viewing in, because he's promoting aggressively.
I think they're all listening in, Brendan.
Yeah, great. Yeah, but particularly himself, because of the fact of he's done a lot of work on the Tuam Athenry Greenway. Galway could become a hub.
We don't want to be overtly political.
No, I just mention it because he's a good man for that. And
it is Galway
John,
politics.
so
just on that note, I might comment on that, because on the last City Council agenda, we did have the opportunity to have input into the current public consultation on the reopening of phase 2 and 3 of the Western Rail Corridor, and we didn't get to it, unfortunately. Now, I made a submission myself. And you mentioned a while ago, Brendan, about the cars coming into the city. I actually see the reopening of that railway, and a potential reopening, as one way of taking a lot of cars out of the city, along with a few other measures. So, I mean, I would support Greenway. I think, I think firstly we need to enhance our public transportation system.
Big time.
And I'm not sure, and even I just happened to meet a few people in the Knocknacarry area who were cycling enthusiasts recently, and currently, from my perspective, what I see as the priority for Galway City Council in terms of cycling is the Greenway from Galway to Athlone. And I'm not sure that's prudent. I'm not sure that's prudent as a transport solution for our city. I agree with you. I mean, there's no doubt
what
about
about the
it.
Connemara Greenway?
Oh, I think the Connemara Greenway is a straightforward one. I mean, there won't be an active railway line between Galway and Clifton. I think it's very safe to say that. And I would totally support the Connemara Greenway. I also was supporting the Silver Strand to Stalin development, and I think that should go ahead. The Healthy Greens initiative was a fantastic one.
Great.
The community I live in myself have made an application, and we want to include the area of Miller's Lane and the pitches there, and we want to actually make Miller's Lane a greenway.
Brilliant.
You know,
Brilliant.
A place
within the city.
Yeah,
that'd be great.
And John,
lovely.
John,
lovely idea.
you look at London. I'm going to London tomorrow at the invitation of the Mayor, Sadiq Khan. They're launching London to celebrate. London has the world's first national park city. London, in fact, even though we think of concrete and tarmac, it's actually 49.8% green and blue. Galway could be that green and blue jewel. And you're right about the public transport, the Western Rail Corridor. Why not have both?
Absolutely.
There's no reason.
Yeah, so long as
It's not one or the other.
Absolutely.
There's
so
a
long
lot
as the
of
Greenway
transport options we could discuss.
Well, so long as the Greenway doesn't impede the development of the rail,
I agree.
I'm very much in favour of
and
it.
you know what's an awful pity, going back to nostalgia again, is that they ever got rid of the railway line from Galway out to Clifton. Because
Yes.
can you imagine that for tourism?
Absolutely.
Sorry, I'm just conscious that Owen doesn't have a microphone and he's not getting a proper.
No, it's grand. I suppose, yeah.
We have to be balanced here.
Yeah,
of course.
having a greenway would be vital, but I think
Greenways.
greenways.
Greenways,
But
yeah.
on top of that, I do think that, from my point of view, the priority should be daily usable public service cycling lanes,
Yeah.
and making sure that, because greenways are wonderful assets to have,
For
but we
tourists.
need to make sure that people
I think we're
working
all agreed
every
with you
day
on
are
that.
able to
that's
cycle.
not true.
Yeah.
Owen. The Connemara Greenway is for both commuter traffic as well as for tourism traffic, and anybody out in Moycullen will tell you that. So it's not
good.
just for tourists. No way.
I didn't.
Greenways are
I
both
didn't
ways.
say it was for
No,
tourists.
but you gave that impression.
Okay, but I'm talking about within the city,
And it's a good point about the cycling,
we're
without a doubt.
reprioritising more space
Yeah.
on our roads.
Absolutely.
That we have.
Oh yeah, we're all
But,
agreed on that.
Back on the question of parks,
Yes.
it is about how much prioritization, how much investment, how much
Yeah.
pride we put into those places, because
Exactly.
we have so few, valuable public realm in this city, and that's really what people take as something to take pride in,
Absolutely.
something that we all
Absolutely.
share as a large community.
Yeah.
And I think we need to be making sure that so many spaces are commercialized nowadays that you can't enter without paying something, and we need spaces where you can just live.
Yes.
Yes.
Can I just make a point? And I think Brendan will probably agree on the parks. They aren't utilised enough. And let's take our local one here, Westside. And I've had discussions with the mayor and some of the other councillors about this. That there was a lot of money put into Westside, and it looked nice with the trees, and the football pitches are perfectly manicured, and the running tracks are great. But nothing was done for the tennis courts or the basketball courts. And to me, they're the two easiest things to play there. You know, and I spoke to one of the councillors last week who said there is a plan in City Hall to resurface the tennis courts, and I would hope the the basketball courts as well. But I would say that, this would have to be done now, and we're in such an era of well-being and health, that we need to have these facilities.
Yeah, John
available.
wants to come in on
Yeah,
that.
I mean, no doubt about it, Mike. We should make sure those facilities are in the best condition possible.
Brilliant.
I just think we might have more of a priority on the active recreational spaces as opposed to the passive ones. And I think we need to do more to make sure people use our passive recreational spaces. And I think one of the things we spoke about earlier is the vandalism, antisocial behaviour. I think they occur in areas that are probably designed for passive recreation but aren't being used for passive
I
recreation.
agree with you.
And I think we need to enhance our passive recreation spaces.
Absolutely.
Brendan,
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with John. We need the active recreation zones, absolutely, be it the football pitches or the tennis courts. But we also need to give opportunities for biodiversity, and we are part of that. I mean, when I go out gardening, I never use gloves. You look at me, I look at you. We look like we're just skin, bone, and flesh. Actually, 47% of our cells are non-human, and they're the bugs, and we get them from nature. And it's only now that science is showing us the importance of that. So I wouldn't say it should be either active recreation or the passive areas.
Yeah,
The
it should
passive
go
areas are critical, especially now with climate change. We need more trees than ever before. And Galway, the Terryland Forest Park that you mentioned, Neil, that was a community initiative that we started in 1995. 1995, and it opened 2000. It has nearly 100,000 trees. That is a huge carbon sink, and we need more of those trees planted.
Although we talked about 500,000 initially in relation to
yes,
that,
yes,
and I mean
yes.
the progress in that was very strong in the early days.
Yes.
And the council didn't have more money then than it does now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yet that progress has slowed.
It is
So,
slow
I
because
mean,
of
I think
land
John is
purchasing.
right. It is about priorities.
Yes.
And what you end up with quite often is political rows.
Yeah.
And that's what's been happening over the last number of years.
But
In fairness, John hasn't been on the council, Owen hasn't been on the council.
They're new. And
There's
this
been a
is
lot
but
of
I just
rows
want to
and
say
they end
a
up
thing.
doing nothing.
There's nothing more important now than the health of the planet, and we have to really make place for nature.
Of course.
Yeah, and I think there's places for nature, absolutely. We should be looking at it in all respects. We just had a proposal for a new graveyard, and I think we need to be looking at the biodiversity of our urban graveyards, which is something that's growing across Europe. But I think having these passive recreational spaces that are in our public realm is also an equality issue. People can access it without paying. We need to make sure that they're universally accessible to people, because it's about... we're talking about civic pride, but we're talking about who's gone before, and it should be about everybody who lives here.
Here's an aside for you now. Would we be better off focusing on a crematorium as opposed to another graveyard? Because think of space, think of land for housing.
I think it's a personal choice for people, Mike.
I
I
think
mean,
so, John.
we need
I
to
think
offer
so.
people the choice. I mean,
but at the moment,
we have a tradition of burying our loved ones.
We do, but I think it'd be a very good option to have.
It's my understanding that they looked at it for this site, but it was not appropriate for this
Really?
site.
Yeah. And wasn't there a lot of talk, just to go off on a side, Neil, sorry, about that site? How do you guys feel about that site being chosen?
Well, the manager has said to me, I asked him actually after the meeting, he did say to me that before we can proceed to develop that site as a graveyard, we need to replace the recreation and amenity land. And he said that's his priority for the site. Look, there's a big demand for a graveyard, unfortunately. And that isn't going to satisfy the demand, Mike. I mean, I think it's about 3.5 acres. The report given to us reckon 1,000 plots. You know, as the city's population is increasing, you can see they'll probably fill up more quickly than we'd like.
Thinking down the line, space, and practicalities.
No, yeah, definitely.
You know, but I do take your point, John. Some people do want to be buried.
Yeah, and I think the recreation on the media asset, it's very important.
I'm sure everybody wants to be buried in some way.
Okay,
I'm not sure a lot of us like try to avoid it too.
We have we're into the last 5 minutes of the show.
Can I bring up one for you, Neil?
Well, what I just want to say is that I'd certainly like to focus on a few solutions or a few ideas that people have. You know, our guests have really in how things. What are the big priorities that need to be put in place? You know, in order to improve things in terms of the civic pride in Galway. And we start with John.
Yeah, well, if you consider the course of our discussion here, we've gone through housing, transport, amenity, graveyards. There's a lot. So there sure is a lot. We need, I suppose, to support the methodology, and if it's the LCDC or if there's a different method, a better method of engaging the public in the council decisions. We need to enhance, there's no doubt, I think we're all in agreements, we need to increase the level of Geraghty on patrol in the city. So we do. And, I think there's a great demand among the citizens. You can sense how strong and passionate Brendan is about it, of increasing the green spaces and making them, getting the public, because Mike has said it, some of them are not being used maybe as well as they should. Of getting the public to use our green spaces, to take ownership of them, to assist in the management of them. I think that's happening at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a very broad topic. We've covered a lot of things here. I think it's about having a more engaged council, and then having more engagement with the council. It's a two-way conversation, and information needs to flow to both ways, because there are positive things. There are people up at 5 a.m. every morning making sure our streets are clean, but there's always more that we could be doing. I think you look around our city and you see dereliction is a massive issue. You look at the Cllr Great Southern that has been sitting there for a decade now. I can't even remember when it was an open hotel.
Yeah, and what about that? We discussed this last week. You know, the derelict sites are not being put on the register by the council.
Yeah,
and that's your guys' responsibility. You know.
I was just on that, Neil. I mean, anybody can apply to the council to have a site included in the derelict sites.
No,
not
but
just
if
not just
it's
councillors.
not working, if it's no, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that the number of derelict sites compared to the number on the register is actually very significantly low. It needs to improve, and I mean that the councillors need to look at perhaps why not. What's the issue?
Possibly we need to look at that, but again, I mean, the public should know that anybody out there can make an application to have a site included in the in the list of derelict sites.
And you're saying the public are not doing that?
Well, in fact, you're saying that more than I'm saying that. So
I'm saying the figures are not very good.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking maybe it does need to be looked at. So, but
just back to Owen before we go on to Speedie. I'd like to, because Owen spoke this week about the Cllr Great Southern. And would you like to speak maybe about fines and what can be done to deter people from leaving?
Yeah, I think there's for the first year that site is derelict, there's a 3% fine levy, but that's not representative of perhaps what is appropriate for depending on what the developer can actually afford to pay. And I think we need to make sure that we are proactively making sure that derelict levy fines are paid, because it's more than just the fine that's being applied. There is
I suggest from Brendan's reaction there that these fines aren't being paid.
No, they are not being paid, but there is a negative impact on local communities that cannot be lost. It's more than just a building that is sitting there empty.
Can I just say something about the derelict sites? I was on the SPC. I remember when the Derelict Sites Act came in 1989. At the end of the day, the council can take ownership of those. But the reason why they're not going on to derelict sites registered locally, and I totally disagree with it, they said they won't put them on until they find out the owner. To me, if they're bad sites, they should be on. Secondly, is they won't put them on while the negotiations are happening with the owner, when they do find out the owner is in those cases. So the process is long. If it's a derelict site, who cares who the owner is? Give a period of time, it should be on it, you know.
People are applying, you're right, Brendan.
Yeah,
so
John's
point.
John, you'll find that because I wasn't
there.
sure myself until actually it was on the SPC. So they're not putting it on for those two reasons. To me, that's inexcusable.
Perhaps. And I mean, all I can say is, I mean, I don't know the level of negotiations that goes on between councillors and landowners or site owners. I know the existence of the list and what's on it.
Yes.
And they're probably, and I would say there are more sites throughout the city maybe that should be on it. I think, I mean, obviously the one Owen has raised is a very good one. I mean, it's been raised previously too, the Corbegate Southern site. But other ones may not be in the ownership of major developers. They may be in the ownership of people who genuinely can't afford to develop it. They may not be in a position to maintain it and manage it themselves. And I think the council should engage with those people in that manner.
And don't the council take over properties sometimes, John? Surely that's an avenue for housing. If people can't do anything with their property, maybe the council should come up with some kind of a...
Well, true. I believe, true compensation and true discussion.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Absolutely, John. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll finish up then.
Yeah, you have your question, Brendan, still as to what are the things you'd like to be.
Yeah.
To be
First of all, what I'm looking forward to is working with the new councillors, and 2 of them are present. I think there's great opportunities there. What I'd like to see is the issues of housing tackled, the issues of transport tackled, and thirdly is to make Galway a national park city, to involve all peoples of the city. Developing and using the parks, planting the trees, having the rooftop gardens. It's a great, no matter where you are across the city, in a neighbourhood, a community garden is a great opportunity to bring people together. But I think we have to refocus what cities are. Cities should more than just be concrete and tarmac. We have to bring green and blue. And Galway is the Venice of Ireland. When you look at it, there is so much beautiful waterways, So we have to get the balance right between the recreational, with flooding, which is going to increase more and more, between the recreational active zones and the biodiversity nature reserves. I think we're in a good place, and I think will happen over the next 4 or 5 years.
Yes, well, on that good note, I think we've come to the end of our broadcast here today.
Just wrap it up.
And
maybe just a couple of words.
I'd like to thank my co-host, Mike Geraghty.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you very much. Just a couple of little things. First of all, thank you very much, John, Owen, and Brendan for coming. You participated brilliantly today. I think it was a good discussion. Yes. We have ministers in listening to us now, which is nice. So we might actually get something done nationally as opposed to locally, which would be great. So just a couple of things, guys. On the updates, next week's programme is Women in Politics, and we're still confirming the numbers.
It would make up for this panel.
Yes. Well, we could have called it Men in Politics.
Yes, that's the subtext.
Neil and I are very much into balance. No, we're not saying there'll be no men on it next week. We'll see. We'll see what we can pull out of the hat, And then just to let you know, we're taking a break from the Galway Politics Live in August. We'll still be working. We're going to do a couple of podcasts, and one that's very close to my own heart. We're doing one on Galway United, and the title is Where to Now for Galway United, and I've lined up so far Mark Herrick and Mike Flaherty, which is great, and we're looking for maybe another candidate or 2. So that's one we'll be recording, we'll be sending out. So Neil and I are returning those as summer specials. We're also going to do one on the music scene in Galway, and we're going to be highlighting a few Galway bands, one of them being Galway-based Bardon, a group from Mexico and Brazil. So we're really delighted they have a new single out this week. I hope you'll all check it out. And on top of that, there's another local artist we want to promote, is Beth Dowling, from Benny, who released a single last week. So, we're not just going to be politics, we're for the whole of Galway and promoting it. And the last thing then I just want to say is thank you all for listening in this morning. Sorry we're a little bit late, but that's down to the weather, as Neil said. So
we'll blame
and of course,
the weather for
2 further debates before I go. September the 1st, the environment. And I'm delighted to say Saoirse McHugh. Sorry, Saoirse McHugh, I've only met her once. Basically, she was the Green MEP candidate and did very, very well first time out. She's going to be there as part of the panel. And then the following week on September the 8th, we've a discussion on disability, or as Marion Maloney is going to concentrate on the ability side of disability. So that's it from me, Neil.
Great. And just a final question to our guests. After this, do you think Galway has civic pride? Yes or no?
Well, as I said earlier, I can't measure that we've lost anything. I think I would go back to the point I made at the start. The overwhelming majority of citizens have pride. Unfortunately, we have a minority who, through their actions, show that they've none.
There's a political answer. Owen.
It's a good answer.
Yeah, I do think most people have pride in Galway and recognise it as a unique city in Ireland and in Europe.
Yeah, and Brendan?
I think it does. I look at the how it comes out in terms of the Galway Arts Festival, the Galway Science and Technology Festival, the Pride Festival. They are great opportunities for people to come together and feel that they own the city. But there are opportunities to make it even stronger.
Excellent.
So we'll take that as a broad no to the question. I think that Galway hasn't lost it.
I would accept that. I'd say a lot of work done, a lot more to do.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, so thanks to the audience, and that's the end of our live broadcast for this week, so thank you for watching.